The Mediterranean sun cast golden rays across the pristine waters of Monaco's harbor. Luxury yachts lined the docks like floating palaces. Among them, the Aurora Princess stood out with its sleek white hull and towering masts. It belonged to Camilla Westbrook, a woman whose name appeared in society magazines more often than financial newspapers. Though perhaps it should have been the other way around, Captain. Marcus Thompson had served in the Royal Navy for 23 years before taking early retirement. His reputation for discipline and attention to detail had earned him command of the Royal Guard's Special Investigations Unit. On this particular morning in June, he stood in a cramped office in London, studying photographs that had landed on his desk 3 days earlier. The images showed the Aurora Princess docked at various ports across Europe and North Africa. Nothing unusual at first glance, but the timestamps told a different story. The yacht moved with suspicious frequency, often arriving and departing within hours. For a vessel supposedly used for leisure, it kept a remarkably tight schedule. Detective Sarah Chen sat across from Marcus, tapping her pen against a thick folder. She had spent the last 6 months following a trail of financial irregularities that seemed to evaporate whenever she got close. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and encrypted communications formed a web so complex that even experienced forensic accountants struggled to map it. "The pattern is clear," Sarah said, spreading documents across the table. "Every time the yacht makes port, there's a corresponding spike in certain financial transactions. Small amounts, never enough to trigger automatic alerts, but consistent." Marcus leaned forward, his gray eyes scanning the papers. He had learned long ago that the biggest crimes often hid behind the smallest details. What kind of transactions? Art sales, antique purchases, charity donations. All legitimate on the surface, but the timing is too perfect. And they all connect back to the same network of buyers and sellers. The investigation had begun almost by accident. A customs officer in Tangier had noticed something odd about a declared shipment of textiles leaving the Aurora Princess. The fabric weights didn't match the documentation. By the time officials questioned it, the yacht had already departed, and the paperwork mysteriously corrected itself in the system. But the customs officer had taken photographs. Those photographs found their way to Interpol, which shared them with British authorities, which eventually landed them on Marcus's desk. What started as a possible tax evasion case was beginning to look like something far more significant. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed a number he had hoped never to use. Within hours, he had authorization for a full investigation. The target's connections made this delicate, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Camilla Westbrook moved through elite circles with practiced ease. Her late husband had made his fortune in shipping before his death 5 years earlier, leaving her with considerable wealth and the yacht that had been his pride and joy. She attended charity galas, supported arts foundations, and maintained homes in 3 countries. To everyone who knew her, she was the picture of refined widowhood. But Sarah's investigation had uncovered something troubling. The yacht's crew changed frequently, far more than normal for such a vessel. Most stayed only a few months before disappearing from employment records entirely. Some reappeared working for shipping companies in distant countries. Others seemed to vanish altogether. "We need to see inside that yacht," Marcus said finally. "Everything we have is circumstantial. We need proof." Sarah nodded. "She's scheduled to dock in Portsmouth next week for maintenance. That's British territory. We can move then." Marcus considered the implications. Raiding the private yacht of a prominent socialite required absolute certainty. If they were wrong, his career would end in disgrace. If they were right, they might uncover something that reached far beyond one woman and her boat. He looked at the photographs again, studying the Aurora Princess. Somewhere aboard that floating palace lay answers to questions that had haunted investigators across multiple countries. Somewhere in its holds or hidden compartments, evidence waited to expose a network that had operated in plain sight for years. "Start assembling the team," Marcus said. "I want our best people. And Sarah, this stays completely confidential. If word leaks, everything disappears." As Sarah left to make arrangements, Marcus remained at his desk, watching the sun set through his office window. In 7 days, they would know the truth. In 7 days, The Aurora Princess would give up its secrets or prove them all fools for suspecting. The team assembled in a warehouse near Portsmouth Harbor before dawn. Marcus had handpicked 12 specialists, customs agents, financial investigators, and 3 former Special Forces operatives trained in maritime boarding procedures. They studied blueprints of the Aurora Princess that had been obtained through official registry documents. Though Marcus suspected the actual layout might differ significantly from the filed plans, Detective Sa Chen briefed the team on what they were looking for. The financial trail pointed to high-value goods moving through unconventional channels, art pieces that sold for millions but were never displayed publicly, antiquities that appeared in private collections without proper export documentation, precious metals that moved between countries without triggering standard reporting requirements. The beauty of this operation, Sarah explained, is that everything appears legal individually. A wealthy widow buying art, selling pieces from her late husband's collection, making charitable donations. But when you map it all together, you see a distribution network that spans 4 continents. Young Agent Michael Rodriguez raised his hand. Fresh from training, this would be his first major operation. How do we know she's aware of what's happening? Could someone be using her yacht without her knowledge? Marcus shook his head. The level of coordination required makes that impossible. Someone aboard that vessel is directing operations with military precision. Our job is to find proof. As the sun rose, the Aurora Princess glided into Portsmouth Harbor, its white hull gleaming in the morning light. From their vantage point, the team watched crew members secure the vessel to the dock. Everything appeared routine, a luxury yacht arriving for scheduled maintenance. Nothing more. Camilla herself was not aboard. According to their intelligence, she was in London attending a museum fundraiser. This was by design. Marcus had ensured the maintenance scheduling happened when she would be otherwise occupied. Reducing the chance of interference or warning, at exactly 9 o'clock, Marcus gave the signal. The team moved swiftly, presenting legal warrants to the surprised dock security. Within minutes, they had secured the gangway and boarded the vessel. The skeleton crew of 5 looked shocked as officials in tactical gear swept through the upper decks. The yacht's interior exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of luxury. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and original artworks lined the corridors. The main salon could host 50 guests comfortably. Private cabins featured silk bedding and gold fixtures. Everything spoke of wealth deployed without restraint. But Marcus wasn't interested in luxury. He directed teams to specific areas: the cargo holds, crew quarters, especially the sealed storage compartments listed as containing personal effects. Sarah coordinated the financial team, who began photographing and documenting every item of value aboard in the main cargo hold. They found exactly what the manifest declared: furniture being transported for an upcoming charity auction, properly documented and appearing legitimate. Crates of wine, some quite valuable, but all with appropriate customs stamps. Personal luggage and household items. Nothing obviously illegal. "Captain, you need to see this," called Agent Rodriguez from deeper in the hold. He stood before a sealed compartment that didn't appear on any blueprint. The lock was electronic, far more sophisticated than necessary for storing spare parts or maintenance equipment. The team's technical specialist, a quiet woman named Janet Liu, approached with her equipment. "This is military-grade encryption," she said after a moment. "Someone spent serious money protecting whatever's inside." Marcus made a decision. "Open it." Janet worked for 20 minutes, her fingers dancing across a portable computer interface connected to the lock mechanism. Finally, something clicked. The seal released with a hiss of pressurized air, and the compartment door swung open. Inside, the space was climate-controlled and carefully organized. But instead of smuggled goods, they found something unexpected: server equipment, sophisticated communications gear, and rows of hard drives secured in protective cases. This wasn't a storage compartment. It was a mobile data center. Sarah's eyes widened. This is beyond smuggling physical goods. This is information trafficking. Marcus examined the equipment without touching anything. "Get the cyber forensics team here immediately." and nobody touches anything until they arrive. As they waited, Sarah's phone buzzed. She stepped away to take the call, returning moments later with a pale face. "Marcus, we have a problem. Camilla's lawyers just arrived at the dock, and they're not alone. There are representatives from 3 embassies demanding to know what's happening." Marcus had expected legal resistance, but embassy involvement complicated matters significantly. It suggested the network extended into diplomatic circles, using protected channels to move goods and information beyond the reach of normal law enforcement. Let them board, Marcus decided. But nobody enters this hold without supervision. And get those cyber specialists here faster. As diplomatic representatives and lawyers crowded onto the yacht, Marcus stood guard over the hidden compartment. Whatever data those servers contained, it was worth protecting with diplomatic immunity and expensive lawyers. Which meant it was exactly what they needed to see. The Aurora Princess had given up its first secret, but Marcus suspected this was only the beginning. The real question was what those servers would reveal once the encryption was broken, and how far the network extended beyond this floating palace. The standoff on the Aurora Princess lasted 6 hours. Lawyers argued jurisdiction, while embassy officials made carefully worded threats about diplomatic incidents. Through it all, Marcus stood firm, knowing that backing down now would mean losing everything they had worked months to uncover. Finally, a senior official from the Home Office arrived with expanded warrants and diplomatic clearances that silenced the protests. The cyber forensics team was allowed to begin their work, carefully imaging the servers without disturbing the original data. Janet Liu led the digital investigation, her team working through the night as the yacht remained secured at the dock. Marcus and Sarah took turns supervising, neither willing to leave the vessel unattended. By the following morning, Janet had preliminary findings that made both investigators realize they had stumbled onto something far larger than anticipated. "These servers aren't just storing data," Janet explained, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "They're routing transactions through multiple encrypted channels. Financial transfers, communication logs, shipping manifests, all moving through a network designed to be virtually untraceable." Sarah leaned over Janet's shoulder, studying the scrolling data on screen. "Can you decode any of the actual content?" "Some of it. The encryption is layered, but whoever set this up made one critical mistake. They backed everything up locally, probably for redundancy. Those backups use slightly older encryption protocols." Janet pulled up a spreadsheet filled with numbers and codes. "These are transaction records going back 3 years, and the amounts are staggering." Marcus studied the figures. Individual transactions ranged from 50,000 to several million pounds. But the frequency was what caught his attention. Dozens per week, sometimes multiple per day. When Sarah's team began calculating totals, the number exceeded 2 billion pounds over the 3-year period. Marcus asked. Janet opened another file, this one containing scanned documents and photographs. Everything. Artwork stolen from museums and sold to private collectors. Antiquities looted from archaeological sites. Conflict diamonds. Even pharmaceutical supplies diverted from legitimate channels. If it has value and can be transported discreetly, it's in here. But it was the next discovery that truly shocked them. Among the transaction records were names, government officials, business executives, even members of noble families across Europe. Some were buyers, some sellers, but all participants in a network that operated beyond normal legal constraints. "This isn't just smuggling," Sarah said quietly. "This is organized corruption at the highest levels." Marcus made several phone calls, each to higher authorities than the last. By midday, representatives from multiple government agencies had arrived at Portsmouth Harbor. The yacht was now officially a crime scene of international significance. Meanwhile, Camilla Westbrook remained in London, surrounded by lawyers who advised her to say nothing. Her public statement expressed shock and betrayal, claiming she had no knowledge of any illegal activities aboard her late husband's yacht. She suggested that crew members must have been operating independently. Using her trust and position as cover for their crimes, it was a plausible defense, one that Marcus had expected. Wealthy yacht owners often maintained distance from day-to-day operations, leaving actual management to captains and crew. Proving Camilla's direct involvement would require more than server data and transaction records. Sarah focused on the crew members, beginning with the yacht's captain, a weathered Greek sailor named Dimitris Kostas. He had worked for Camilla for 4 years, longer than any other crew member. When agents located him at his hotel near the harbor, he initially refused to cooperate. But Sarah had leverage. The financial records showed payments to Kostas far exceeding normal captain's wages. Offshore accounts in his name contained nearly £3 million. When confronted with this evidence, his resolve crumbled. "I never wanted to be part of this," Kostas said, sitting in an interrogation room with his lawyer. "But once you're in, they don't let you leave." Sarah leaned forward. "Who's they, Dimitris? Who runs this network?" Kostas glanced at his lawyer, who nodded permission to continue. "Mrs. Westbrook presents herself as a widow, enjoying her late husband's fortune. But her husband didn't die naturally. He discovered what she was building and threatened to expose everything. His death was ruled a heart attack, but it was murder. She's been running this operation for over a decade, long before he died." Marcus, watching from behind one-way glass, felt pieces clicking into place. They had assumed Camilla inherited the smuggling operation from her husband. The truth was darker. She had created it, used him as cover, then eliminated him when he became a liability. "The yacht is just one part of it," Kostas continued. "There are warehouses, shipping containers, even legitimate businesses that serve as fronts. She has people in customs, law enforcement, political offices. That's why she's never been caught. Anyone who gets close either joins the network or has accidents." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Marcus knew she was thinking the same thing he was. If Kostas was right, they weren't just fighting one criminal. They were up against an organization with resources and connections that could reach anyone, anywhere. "We need names," Sarah said. "Everyone in the network. Every official taking payments. Every location where goods are stored or transferred." Kostas nodded slowly. "I'll tell you everything, but you need to protect me. Camilla has people everywhere. If she knows I'm talking, I'm dead before the week ends." Arrangements were made to move Kostas to a secure location. As agents escorted him out, Marcus rejoined Sarah in the interrogation room. They both understood the implications of what they had just learned. Captain Kostas provided investigators with a roadmap to an empire built on corruption and greed. Over 3 days of interviews, he detailed operations spanning 15 countries. Involving hundreds of individuals from dock workers to government ministers, each revelation opened new investigations. Each investigation revealed deeper layers of criminality. Sarah coordinated with international agencies. As the scope of the case expanded exponentially, Interpol, Europol, and law enforcement from a dozen nations began simultaneous investigations into their local branches of the network, but everyone agreed that the key was Camilla Westbrook herself. Without proof of her direct involvement, the organization might survive by sacrificing lower-level operators while she remained. Untouchable, Marcus studied the evidence they had gathered, looking for the connection that would link Camilla directly to the criminal enterprise. The server data was damning, but could theoretically have been operated without her knowledge. Financial transactions ran through so many shell companies and offshore accounts that tracing them to her personally would take years. They needed something immediate and undeniable. Agent Rodriguez, working through crew member testimonies, found the thread they needed. A former steward named Paolo Vincente had worked aboard the Aurora Princess for 8 months before being abruptly dismissed 3 years earlier. Unlike other crew members who disappeared into the network or took payouts for silence, Paolo had simply returned to his home in Naples and resumed working on commercial vessels. When Italian authorities located Paolo, he was surprisingly willing to talk. "I was dismissed because I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see," he told investigators via video conference. "Mrs. Westbrook met with a man in her private cabin. I was bringing evening tea and overheard their conversation through the door." Sarah pressed him for details. "What did you hear?" "They were discussing a shipment of paintings. The man was concerned about moving them through customs in Singapore. Mrs. Westbrook became angry. She told him she had paid officials specifically to avoid such problems. She mentioned names, positions, exact amounts of bribes. I must have made a noise because the conversation stopped. When I entered with the tea, they both stared at me like I was a dead man. Paolo had been smart enough to realize the danger. He requested immediate dismissal, claiming family emergency, and left the yacht at the next port. He had expected retaliation, but remained low profile enough that the network apparently decided he wasn't worth the risk of eliminating. I kept notes, Paolo said. Names I remembered, dates, details. I didn't know what to do with the information, but I kept it in case I ever needed insurance. I'll provide everything. Marcus dispatched agents to Naples to collect Paolo's documentation and arrange protective custody. If his testimony was accurate, it could directly tie Camilla to bribery and smuggling operations, destroying her claims of ignorance. Meanwhile, the cyber forensics team made another breakthrough. Janet Liu discovered encrypted communications between Camilla's personal phone and various members of the network. The encryption was sophisticated, but the backup servers had stored decryption keys that allowed investigators to read the actual messages. The communications were carefully worded, using code words and vague references, but when cross-referenced with transaction dates and shipping manifests, the pattern became clear. Camilla was directly coordinating operations, approving shipments, authorizing payments, and in several cases, ordering the elimination of potential threats to the organization. One message, sent just 2 months earlier, was particularly chilling. A customs inspector in Morocco had begun asking questions about repeated inspections of the Aurora Princess. Camilla's message was brief. Handle the inspector's situation permanently. Use the standard approach. The inspector died in what was reported as a car accident. Sarah presented these findings to the prosecutorial team, who confirmed they now had sufficient evidence to charge Camilla with multiple serious crimes, including murder. The challenge was arresting her before the network could help her disappear. Camilla remained in her London townhouse, apparently confident that her lawyers and connections would protect her. She had not attempted to flee, which Marcus found suspicious. Someone that intelligent had to know the investigation was closing in. Either she believed herself genuinely untouchable, or she had a contingency plan they hadn't discovered. The decision was made to arrest her immediately, before she could activate whatever escape route might exist. At 6 in the morning, Marcus led a team of armed officers to the exclusive Mayfair address where Camilla maintained her primary residence. The townhouse was elegant, but not ostentatious, befitting someone who had built her fortune on appearing respectable. As officers surrounded the building, Marcus knocked on the front door. A butler answered, looking genuinely surprised by the presence of police. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Camilla Westbrook," Marcus stated. Presenting the documentation, the butler stepped aside without protest. "Mrs. Westbrook is in the morning room having breakfast. Shall I announce you?" "That won't be necessary." Marcus proceeded through the tastefully decorated home, officers behind him. They found Camilla exactly where the butler indicated, sitting at a small table with coffee and newspapers spread before her. She looked up as they entered, and Marcus was struck by her complete composure. There was no shock, no fear, only cold calculation in her eyes. "Captain Thompson," she said, setting down her coffee cup, "I've been expecting you, though I thought you might wait until a more civilized hour." "Camilla Westbrook, you are under arrest for smuggling, bribery, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder," Marcus stated formally. While an officer moved forward with handcuffs, Camilla stood gracefully, extending her hands for the restraints. "I assume you have evidence to support these dramatic accusations?" "Substantial evidence," Sarah said, entering the room, "including testimony from members of your network and communications from your personal devices." For the first time, something flickered in Camilla's expression. Not fear, but what might have been grudging respect. "Then I underestimated you, detective. That rarely happens." As officers led her toward the door, Camilla paused. "You should know, Captain, that arresting me solves nothing. This network existed before me and will continue after me. You've won a battle, not the war." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Perhaps, but today's victory is enough." The arrest of Camilla Westbrook triggered a cascade of investigations across multiple continents. As news spread through the criminal network, panic set in. Some members attempted to flee, others tried to destroy evidence, and a few chose to cooperate with authorities in exchange. Before reduced sentences, Sarah coordinated with international teams as they executed simultaneous raids across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Warehouses filled with stolen art were discovered in Brussels. A shipping container terminal in Singapore revealed millions in diverted pharmaceuticals. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands were frozen, trapping over £800 million in criminal proceeds. But Camilla's warning proved prophetic. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered the network's true extent was far beyond what even Costas had known. The organization operated in layers, with each level knowing only what was necessary for their function. Camilla herself had reported to someone higher. Though she refused to identify them, Marcus interrogated her personally, hoping to break through her composed exterior. She sat across from him in the secure facility where she was being held, looking as elegant in prison clothes as she had in her townhouse. "You must understand you're facing life imprisonment," Marcus said. "Multiple murder charges alone guarantee you'll never be free. Cooperation is your only option for any consideration." Camilla smiled faintly. "Captain, I've lived quite well for many years. I've traveled the world, enjoyed luxuries most people only dream of, and wielded power that would astonish you. If this is where it ends, I've still won more than I've lost. What about the people you've hurt? The inspector in Morocco, your own husband, countless others who got in your way?" "Casualties of business," she replied without emotion. "You think legitimate enterprises don't leave bodies in their wake? They just use lawyers and bankruptcies instead of more direct methods. I simply chose to be honest about the nature of power." Sarah joined them, carrying a tablet with new information. "We've traced 3 of the shell companies back to a holding group registered in Luxembourg. The beneficial owner is listed as a foundation, but the foundation's board includes some interesting names. Lord Geoffrey Hamilton, for one." Marcus saw the flicker in Camilla's eyes. They had touched something significant. Lord Hamilton was a respected figure in British society. Known for his charitable work and business acumen, his family had wealth stretching back generations, and he served on boards of multiple prestigious organizations. He was also, according to the new evidence Sarah's team had uncovered, one of the network's founding members. "Hamilton recruited me 15 years ago," Camilla said suddenly, apparently deciding that protecting him no longer served her interests. He had been running similar operations for decades but needed someone to manage the maritime side. My husband's shipping business provided perfect cover. Over the next hours, Camilla detailed the structure of an organization that had operated for over 40 years. What had started as simple smuggling of luxury goods had evolved into a sophisticated global network, handling everything from stolen art to illegal arms. The network's power came from its membership: politicians, business leaders, and aristocrats who protected each other while sharing in enormous profits. Lord Hamilton isn't even the top, Camilla revealed. There's a council, 7 members, each controlling different aspects of operations. They meet twice yearly in various locations. I only ever knew Hamilton directly, but I've deduced who some of the others are from financial patterns and operational decisions. She provided names, each more shocking than the last. A German industrialist, a French finance minister, an Italian media mogul, a Saudi prince, a Chinese shipping magnate, and 2 she couldn't identify. Knowing them only by code names used in encrypted communications, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope. Each name represented investigations that would take months or years, diplomatic complications, and battles against some of the most powerful people in the world. But he also knew they couldn't stop now. Not when they had come this far. Sarah organized task forces for each council member, coordinating with agencies in relevant countries. The challenge was moving quickly enough that the network couldn't consolidate its defenses while gathering enough evidence to make charges stick in court. Lord Hamilton was arrested 3 days after Camilla began cooperating. Unlike her composed acceptance, he erupted in rage, threatening lawsuits and calling in favors from every politician he knew. His lawyers descended like a swarm, For a time, it seemed he might escape prosecution through sheer force of influence, but the evidence was too substantial to ignore. Hamilton's personal computers, seized during the arrest, contained decades of communications that documented his role in building and managing the network. Financial records showed payments to officials across multiple governments. Most damning were videos, apparently kept as insurance, showing meetings with other council members where crimes were openly discussed. As more arrests followed, the network began to collapse. Lower-level operators made deals to avoid prosecution. Shell companies were dissolved. Bank accounts were seized. Stolen goods worth hundreds of millions were recovered and returned to their rightful owners or governments. Agent Rodriguez, tracking the broader investigation, brought Marcus's regular updates. We've identified 4 of the 7 council members. 2 are in custody, 1 is negotiating surrender, and 1 has fled to a country without extradition treaties. The other 3 remain unknown, but were closing in. Marcus studied the organizational charts they had developed, showing the network's structure like a vast spider web, with threads connecting across the globe. Camilla's yacht had been just one small piece of an empire that touched nearly every continent and penetrated institutions that were supposed to be beyond corruption. "What's the total now?" Marcus asked. "How much money moved through this network?" Sarah consulted her latest figures. Conservative estimate, over 10 years, approximately £12 billion. But that's only what we can document. The actual amount is probably much higher. £12 billion. The number was almost incomprehensible. And it had flowed past investigators, customs officials, and regulatory agencies for decades because the people involved were protected by wealth, position, and carefully constructed reputations. 6 months after the raid on the Aurora Princess, Marcus stood in a courtroom watching Camilla Westbrook receive her sentence. The judge, after hearing weeks of testimony and reviewing mountains of evidence, delivered a verdict that would keep her imprisoned for the rest of her life. Multiple life sentences for murder, plus additional decades for smuggling, bribery, and money laundering. Camilla showed no reaction as the sentence was read. She had maintained her composure throughout the trial, answering questions with cold precision and showing no remorse for her actions. As guards led her away, she glanced once at Marcus. If she felt anything about her fate, her expression didn't reveal it. Lord Hamilton's trial followed, with similar results. The once respected aristocrat was stripped of his titles and sentenced to 40 years imprisonment. His arrest had sent shockwaves through British high society. With many of his former associates rushing to distance themselves from the scandal, the German industrialist and Italian media mogul faced charges in their respective countries. The French minister, facing arrest, had taken his own life, leaving a note that provided valuable information about network operations, but offered no explanation for his choices. The Saudi prince had used diplomatic immunity to return to his country, where he was reportedly under house arrest facing internal justice. But 3 council members remained unidentified. Despite Camilla's cooperation and the massive amount of data recovered from the yacht's servers, these individuals had protected their identities so thoroughly that investigators could only speculate about who they were. The network's most carefully guarded secret was the identity of its true leadership. Sarah continued coordinating the international investigation, working with agencies in 23 countries to dismantle what remained of the organization. Hundreds of lower-level operators were arrested or accepted plea deals. Billions in assets were seized. Stolen artifacts were returned to museums and governments. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had only wounded the network, not destroyed it. Camilla's final words haunted him. This operation had existed for over 40 years, surviving changes in technology, politics, and law enforcement techniques. Could one major investigation really end something so deeply rooted? Agent Rodriguez, now promoted for his work on the case, shared Marcus's concerns. We've tracked financial movements that suggest someone is rebuilding. Smaller operations, more careful, but the patterns are familiar. They're learning from their mistakes. Marcus met with international law enforcement leaders to discuss long-term strategies. The investigation had revealed fundamental weaknesses in how borders, customs, and financial regulations operated. Criminal networks could exploit gaps between jurisdictions, moving faster than legal cooperation could follow. "We need permanent international task forces," Marcus argued at a conference in Brussels. "Not just responding to crises, but actively monitoring and investigating. These networks think in decades. We need to do the same." Some governments resisted, citing sovereignty concerns and budget limitations. But enough supported the idea that planning began for a new, international agency focused specifically on elite criminal networks. It would take years to establish. But the investigation had created political will that hadn't existed before. Sarah received an offer to help lead the new agency, coordinating operations across borders. Marcus was offered early promotion to oversee Britain's participation. Both accepted, knowing their work was far from finished. The Aurora Princess itself became evidence in multiple trials before being sold at auction, proceeds going to compensate victims of the network's crimes. The elegant yacht that had seemed like a symbol of innocent luxury now represented something darker, how easily criminality could hide. Behind respectability and wealth, one afternoon, Marcus returned to Portsmouth Harbor and stood at the dock where they had first raided the yacht. The space was empty now, just weathered wood and water. But he remembered every moment of that morning, the tension and uncertainty. Not knowing what they would find, Janet Liu joined him, having also been invited to the new international agency to head its cyber forensics division. "Do you think we really made a difference?" she asked. "Or did we just make them more careful?" Marcus considered the question. They had arrested dozens of criminals, recovered billions in stolen money and goods, and exposed corruption at the highest levels of multiple societies. But the 3 unknown council members remained free, presumably working to rebuild what had been destroyed. "Both," he said finally. "We made them more careful, which means they're less effective. And we proved they can be caught. That's something." Over the following year, the trials continued. More convictions followed. More assets were seized. The investigation had become the largest criminal case in European history, involving over 1,000 defendants across multiple countries. But Marcus knew the real victory wasn't measured in arrests or convictions. It was in changing how law enforcement approached elite crime. The networks of wealthy and powerful criminals had operated with impunity for so long because they seemed untouchable. The Aurora Princess investigation proved they weren't in a secure facility. Camilla Westbrook spent her days in a small cell, her luxuries and power reduced to memories. She received few visitors and said little. Whatever secrets she still held, she kept to herself. The woman who had once commanded a billion-dollar empire now commanded nothing. Captain Costas, protected in witness security, had started a new life under a different name. Paolo Vincente returned to his work, finally able to sleep without fear. Agent Rodriguez continued investigating financial crimes, building on the experience he had gained. Each had played their part in exposing something that had hidden in plain sight for decades. Marcus submitted his final report on the investigation, a document running to over 3,000 pages detailing every aspect of the case. It would be studied in law enforcement academies and intelligence agencies worldwide. A roadmap for fighting elite criminal networks. On his last day before transitioning to the new international agency, Marcus cleaned out his office. He paused over a photograph of the Aurora Princess, taken that first morning in Portsmouth Harbor. The yacht looked so innocent in the golden sunrise. Hiding secrets that had taken months to fully uncover, he thought about the 3 unknown council members. Still out there somewhere, perhaps watching the news reports about their former associates' convictions. They would be more careful now, more cautious. But they would also know that investigators had learned their methods, understood their techniques, and would be watching. The war against elite criminal networks would continue, perhaps forever. There would always be people willing to use wealth and power for illegal gain. But there would also be investigators like Marcus and Sarah, refusing to accept that anyone was above the law. As Marcus locked his office door for the last time, his phone rang. It was Sarah, calling from Geneva, where she was already setting up operations for the new agency. "We've got something," she said, excitement in her voice. Financial analysts found a pattern in cryptocurrency transactions that matches the network's old methodology. It might be one of the three unknowns trying to rebuild. Marcus smiled despite himself. The work never truly ended. There would always be another investigation, another criminal thinking they were too clever to be caught, another network believing wealth and power made them invisible. "Send me the details," he said. "I'll be there tomorrow." He walked out of the building into the London evening, thinking about everything that had happened since that morning when photographs of a yacht first landed on his desk. They had uncovered a billion-dollar empire, brought down some of the most powerful criminals in the world, and changed how international law enforcement operated. But most importantly, they had sent a message: no one was untouchable. No amount of money or influence could protect someone forever if they chose to break the law. The Aurora Princess investigation proved that justice, though sometimes slow, could reach anyone. The three unknown council members would be found eventually. It might take months or years, but investigators worldwide were now watching, waiting, following every thread. The network had operated in darkness for decades, but light had been shined into their world. They could never operate with the same confidence again. Marcus hailed a taxi. Already thinking about the new investigation Sarah had mentioned, there was always more work to do, more criminals to catch, more victims to help. That was the nature of justice. It wasn't a single victory, but a continuous commitment to protecting people from those who would exploit them. As the taxi pulled away, Marcus looked back at the building where he had spent over 2 decades of his career. He had helped solve hundreds of cases, but the Aurora Princess investigation would define his legacy. It was the case that proved even the most sophisticated criminal networks could be dismantled if investigators were patient. Thorough and unwilling to accept that anyone was beyond the law's reach, the yacht was gone. Sold and probably renamed by now, its criminal history becoming just another story in maritime records. But the impact of what had been discovered aboard that floating palace would echo for years to come. New laws would be written. New international cooperation agreements would be signed. New investigators would be trained using lessons learned from this case. And somewhere, 3 people who thought they were safe would eventually discover they were wrong. Justice might be delayed, but it was coming for them. Marcus would make sure of that. It was no longer just his mission, but the mission of hundreds of investigators across dozens of countries, all working together to ensure that wealth and power could no longer shield criminals from consequences. The Aurora Princess investigation was over, but the work it had started was just beginning. And that, Marcus thought as the taxi carried him toward his next chapter, was exactly as it should be.